Today, I want to talk about flux management. The solder that we use, typically flux core, almost exclusively flux core, contains flux. There is flux in the solder wire itself. And you see it when you solder, you get a little pool of melted flux that flows out around the solder joint. And I believe that flux management, along with heat management and time management, which are all sides of the same coin, it's a multi-sided coin, are the difference between somebody who makes it look easy and somebody who struggles. And I think it's important to understand what the flux does. The flux makes the solder flow. It wets the surfaces. It helps the solder to flow out and adhere. And without flux, and we can get rid of the flux just by putting a bunch of solder onto my soldering iron like this and letting it burn off. And that's what the smoke is. The smoke is the flux burning off. And let's try to get this to solder. You can see this is not going to solder. The solder will not stick. You get peaks and pokes, and it's very ugly. And you start to get that gold color, which is oxidation. And it gets kind of crinkly and dirty looking, and it is not going to solder no matter what you do because you don't have flux. And so one of the problems that we often see with beginners is they'll get a nice joint, but it's not quite right. And they'll come in and try to change it. Well, now your flux is all burned off. And so you start to get peaks, and as you're trying to adjust this, it gets wrinkly and ugly looking, and you'll get peaks and points and blobs, and it starts to look bad, right? These ones over here are nice and shiny. These ones over here are ugly. And so what has happened is we've burned off the flux. So all the flux on this joint is burned off. And if I clean off my iron, throw a little bit more solder on there and let the flux burn off, and come in here, I can do crazy things with these joints, and I can't even get the solder to stick to this one. And so flux management, I think, is one of those things that really makes a difference. And so you guys have all seen me, if you've watched the other videos, use my Kester liquid flux. I made a video about rescuing bad solder, and this is bad solder here. And I use liquid flux. And what liquid flux is it's the same stuff that's in the core of the solder otherwise. But watch what happens here. I've got some flux on there. I heat that up. Look, it's nice. Right? Now I've got a point on there again because I heated it up after I burned off my flux. But if I come into this one, I can throw a little bit of solder on my iron here. And as long as there's liquid flux there, it's going to solder. See that? Easy as can be. So I think that understanding flux, understanding what it does, and understanding why it's important will really help to improve your soldering. And so what I'm doing is I'm bringing my iron in, the flux melts, and then I leave it. And so what you have to do is get the right amount of solder on there and then get out. Now, if you go back to either of these joints, they're going to get ugly. They're going to get oxidized. They're going to get peaks and bumps and things on them. And that is the big mistake, right? Coming back in here and trying to make adjustments after the fact, once the flux is burned off, and you're going to get problems. And even, if you come in here and you get a joint that's poorly soldered, if you come back and try and adjust it, it's just going to go wrong on you. So pay attention to flux. Flux is really important. And I keep saying this, get liquid flux. It makes your life so much easier. And you guys, if you watch the video, you've seen me do this. I'll throw flux on here, have a little bit of solder on my iron, and just run down the line like this. And it looks like you know what you're doing, because you do. And also because you've got liquid flux.